Okay, everybody, thank you very much for joining us tonight, for giving your time up. Tonight's session is hopefully something that you'll find very useful. We think it'll be more useful to the people who are joining us live if you participate. So there are various different ways to do that we'll cover in just a moment. But we really would encourage you to think of this as your opportunity to learn more about what we and the students do at school and ask those questions. Joining you tonight are three of us, and depending on how your Zoom's configured, I think we all have our cameras on right now. Petra, I noticed your emoji has changed from last week.
Yes, I noticed that. So I
Um,
assume my mind is just exploding as opposed to a filthy mouth.
I think the backstory is the students suggested that this was an apt emoji for you. But so on the call tonight, and I think when we speak, maybe we can introduce ourselves, or we can do it now as well. I'm Brian Hughes, Emily Maxwell is here as well, and Petra Willems. We're three of the teachers on the humanities side of PLP, and Mr. Gross remains a mystery for those who have not yet to meet him, but he does exist, we assure you. We showed this graphic the other night, and I do just want to bring it up because, again, I do sincerely thank you for taking time tonight to join us. Parents, represented there on the far left cog, are such a crucial part of the success of any learner. And this is a new graphic that we've started using after tonight. Hopefully many of the icons, especially towards the right-hand side, are going to look familiar. And they represent kind of the system that is PLP. And parents play a crucial role along with their learner and us as teachers in the success of this whole enterprise. Tonight's agenda is focused on these questions. These are kind of the genesis of this whole workshop, I don't know, session, meeting, is answering questions that are often asked of us by parents, especially parents who are new to PLP. And even parents who have had a student in the program for a while, sometimes like to be refreshed on these sort of basic things. How do PLP students learn? We get that a lot because parents often say, well, my child's always on their iPad. I'm not really sure if they're actually doing learning or school or whether they're doing something else. It's different than when they used to come home and put out all the books on the dining room table and I could actually see them with a textbook and with worksheets. So how do I know what they're learning and how do we learn? We'll go into the what your child's learning and show you exactly where you can actually, excuse me, where you can actually follow along. You can see what's happening in the classroom, what instructions that we're giving them, and the actual tasks we're asking students to undertake. Also key for parents, of course, is wondering, well, where can I see teacher feedback on this student performance? How do I know that they're learning? And finally, especially in this quad system, actually, we're sort of confronting grades and report cards in a faster way than we normally might because everything sort of feels a little bit accelerated. So we'll have that conversation around how the feedback that we provide as teachers translates into grades during the reporting periods. Petra and Emily, anything you'd like to add or set the table with? No? Okay. And I'm going to rely on you guys to just keep an eye on the chat as well if there's anything that needs to. Okay, lots of nodding. Speaking of the chat room, so I did mention we'd love to make this participatory, and you can, and we always tell the kids this too, you can feel free to tell us to slow down, to speed up, to move on, to talk about something else. We want this time to be useful to you. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. The chat room in Zoom is a great place because we have, when I'm not speaking, I'll look at it and whoever is not speaking is sort of keeping an eye on it. So a great place to throw a question, throw a comment, throw like, I'm confused about that. Can you clarify that? Can you explain? Anything like that, we can just pick that up. You can also, if you're feeling brave, raise your virtual hand. So in Zoom, there is a way to sort of signal that you would like us to give you the mic, and we'd be more than happy to do that and have your voice be part of the meeting. And then there's always a chance that maybe you would prefer not to do that, or a question might come up after the fact or later on, and you're always welcome to and encouraged to email any of us individually as teachers or the program generally to sort of ask something, a clarifying question, or certainly if you're watching this on the recorded replay, you can press the raise your hand button all you like and it won't work because it won't actually be there. So that would be a great, feel free to send us an email question and we'll get back to you with an answer. Okay. So before we get into those specific parent questions and sort of like get into the details, we like to start with a bit of a higher level overview and a reminder of what this project PLP is all about and the learning that we're engaged in. Petra, I'm going to like surprise you by throwing you in here. Would you like to sort of talk a little to this slide?
Yes. So I think we kind of came to this a long time ago. This is part of the reason Brian and I started in the 10-year journey that is now the performance learning program, was that conversation about developing student agency. We didn't have those words then, but I think that's where we've come to now. And this comes from two people we really admire, educators John Spencer and AJ Giuliani, and their book Empower. You can see it on the bottom of the slide there, highly recommended reading. Where they talk about the shift from students as learners from compliance to engagement. And then the ultimate goal isn't just being an engaged learner, but it's being an empowered learner. And that is the continuum of student agency. And those things really can't exist, pull upon each other. So we're always shifting and thinking about how do we move students on that continuum as far as possible to that empowered stage. And that is definitely the 5-year journey that the students make throughout the performance learning program.
Yeah, we'll make a concerted effort tonight to try and not use a lot of jargony words or teacher talk type things. But at any time, you can call us on that if you want to ask for a definition or explain or ask us to unpack something. See, unpack is a very teacher thing to say. But that's absolutely right. And we're very lucky in North Vancouver. The students that we teach are fantastic, and they fall very comfortably on the compliance side of the spectrum. We don't have a lot of discipline problems or difficult students to teach. And what we're really striving for is to like wake up that like intrinsic curiosity that hopefully is there, that can be nurtured, and have students get excited about their learning. And this idea and concept of agency is really key. We are here to help them. You as parents are hopefully there to help them, but ultimately they have to have some ownership over that and be the agents in their own learning. And you'll hear that sort of echoed over and over tonight, that across the way we learn, it's trying to activate and empower them as agents of their own success. So partly what that looks like is several years ago, as Petra alluded to, we as teachers really embraced in a strong way the teaching methodology that's known as project-based learning. And this is a very complicated and kind of messy term because, as we've said many times before, lots of people think, well, I've done projects in school, so I must have done project-based learning. And that might be true, but I'm probably guessing it's not. We will not get into a full workshop tonight on PBL, although I'd love to do that. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. But what you're seeing on a slide here is again from John Spencer. And this is why. This is why we believe in PBL so strongly, and hopefully why you as students chose to be a part of a program that uses project-based learning as a teaching method, because we're trying to like do the stuff that you're seeing on the screen here. And why do we want to do that? It's this. This is what we're really excited about as teachers. We have, and especially I'm presuming that many of our parents and students on tonight are grade 8 students. You are grade 8, it seems like you've just entered high school. It's exciting. Graduation in grade 12 might seem like it's far away, and it kind of is, but it kind of isn't, right? So we are trying to like start setting you up for the success that's going to be that like runway and launch to the successful contributing members of society that we know you can be. And you're exactly seeing on the screen here what we are trying to create, what we're trying to nurture, what we're trying to encourage in the students every day in the work that they do. Okay, that's a big way of like setting the table and sort of like getting right out there with our point of view on kind of like who we are as teachers. Now let's like try and get a little bit more practical and a little bit more specific. I'm not seeing any hands. I just want to pause for a moment to give people a chance because I just like threw a lot of stuff at you there. Okay, so our first common question is, how do PLP students learn and what does that look like in the classroom? So I already mentioned that we use PBL, project-based learning. That's our methodology. So all of what you're going to hear us talk about today, projects, they kind of look a little bit like what you're seeing on the screen right here. And I'll be honest, we love to say, and we're proud to say that learning is messy, right? Good learning is like a messy kitchen. There's lots of stuff going on. And at the end, hopefully we have a tasty something at the end. And it kind of looks a little bit like this. You see that launch on the far left, that's the starting point. You see a celebration on the right, that's where we're going to end. And along the way, we're going to do a lot of the things that look familiar and are common to a conventional classroom, but maybe the process in which we interact with them is going to be a little bit different. Although learning is often messy and although it kind of looks like this, sort of jumbled and chaotic, we have drawn from a lot of best practices from a lot of other great teachers and a lot of other people, honestly much smarter than us, that have been thinking about how to make project-based learning work. And we have kind of adapted it to PLPs and our students' needs and ways and developed what we call the project path. So this is something that all students that are with us tonight should be well familiar with, because the grade 8s by now, I think, because I know they're a super clever group, have realized that their first experience, this first project we've been working on, is a bit of a Trojan horse for introducing the project path. So they should be, after this call tonight, well versed to explain all of these steps to you. But it's 4 distinct stages that guide the learners through an experience, a learning experience, that hopefully get at that deeper learning that we are striving for. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here. The launch stage is that entry event. It's where we get the learners excited about the inquiry that's about to unfold. It's also where we introduce the driving question, something that the students interrogate right from the very beginning, sometimes by generating like need to knows. We tell them, hey, we're gonna do this. What do we need to know to be able to do that? There is, of course, the phase, which is probably the most familiar to parents and students in conventional classrooms. That's the building knowledge stage, right? You can't do something unless you have something to do it with. So all of that core content knowledge that we would expect students outside of PLP to be getting in other classrooms, our students absolutely cover as well. So building the knowledge, the understanding, the skills that are going to be needed to answer that driving question. The main period of work is in this stage we call develop and critique. That's where students will take what they've learned during the knowledge building stage and actually do something with it. They'll start creating, they'll start building, they'll start writing, they'll start recording. They will go through multiple rounds of revision, meaning they'll submit work, they'll get feedback on that work. They'll take that feedback back, they'll think about it, they'll incorporate the parts that they like and agree with. And that feedback can come from themselves through like a self-evaluation, could come from peers through peer critique protocols. And of course, it also comes from teachers. And there are multiple rounds of this. Students, I think, grade 8 students probably think they've already had to do multiple rounds of critique, but that's just a preview for what's to come. And the benefit, of course, of hearing critique is our work gets better. Petra and Emily are kind of like a little anxious about this slideshow because we try to model what we believe in, and we believe in constant improvement. So this slide deck is never the same like twice. And actually this time it's been pretty dramatically updated. So they have no idea actually kind of what's coming, which is very fun for me. The last stage of the project path, of course, is present and reflect. So here's where the students have gone through that process of inquiry. They've gone through building the knowledge necessary to address the driving question. They've addressed the driving question. They've built something. They've gotten feedback on that something. They've made it better. And finally, they're ready to share it with the world. So it's published to an authentic audience, a public audience, there's a celebration. And finally, at the very end, students will reflect on the process of moving through the path. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. Pause for a moment. Okay, great. Thank you. My chat room monitors are not keeping up with the chat room. Luckily, I'm also here to do double duty. So I hear some great comments here saying, can the parents critique? And also, can you give us an example? Well, I'm so glad you asked for an example. And if you don't mind, I'm going to just put a pin in the parent question because we will come back to that. And if I forget, or if we forget, please remind me, but I think we will address that. I'm going to toss over to Petra now. Oh, no, I'm not. And she will provide an example. Okay, but before we do that, you had a sneak preview there. The project path, organized through these 4 stages, is how students move. But what do they actually do? How do they show us as teachers? How do they show you as parents? How do they show each other as peers in the classroom that they are actually learning? Well, they do that by creating, okay. They do that through the performance of learning tasks. So to keep it simple, and this is like, again, a lot of vocabulary, but it's going to all hopefully pull together for you at the end. We have organized the learning tasks into 3 broad categories. And you'll hear us using this vocabulary when Petra walks through an example in just a second. Stepping stones are as they imply. They are the smaller steps, the stages, the incremental exercises, activities, learnings that help build up to something bigger. The milestone, represented by that check mark there, is the capstone to a certain stage. It is a demonstration of learning that we as teachers require seeing so that we know students are meeting the learning objectives that the ministry prescribes and that we've included in a project. And now there are also opportunities for students that want to go a little further or want to add some richness or want to expand on what they are doing with go deeper tasks. And Petra will give you a little bit more information on that in just a moment. She didn't know that, but she's going to. All right, so to your question then, about what is an example, Petra's going to walk you through the current project that the grade 8s are working on. What better example than to use something that they're engaged in right now? So Petra, I'll control the slides if you want to just tell me what you'd like to see, but basically we just have the project guide here for you to look at.
The chat would like to know, did you enhance the emojis, or is that what the brain looks like at that size?
Oh, thank you very much for asking. Thank you for noting the emoji, Care. The only enhancement is that I did put a nice little drop shadow behind it. So
something grade 8s know how to do now.
Yeah, so using Keynote, there is a drop shadow behind most of the emojis. I didn't put one on stepping stones because it looked really cloudy and the black on black didn't work. So, but nope, that is what the brain looks like at this size.
Okay. So just to give you an example. So this is the project that Ms. Maxwell and I are working with the grade 8s on. So they literally just launched today. So I think this is probably why we're sharing it now, because I don't know if I'm misspeaking for the teachers, but I kind of like to hold the project close to me till it's launched. So I kind of am glad we're not sharing the grade 10 or 11, 12, because they'll launch tomorrow. So I kind of like a bit of mystery for the project. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. Yeah. So the grade 8s got this today, so it's not really a spoiler for them. So you'll see in a project in Basecamp, they always have this as a PDF. This is a document that lives in Basecamp that walks them through it and through the project. And in Basecamp, which you can think of kind of like their file, their binder, every one of these phases of the project path is then broken out and expanded with the information they need to do that task. So this is generally where every project starts. At some point during that launch phase, they will be introduced to the project path. So for example, today with the grade 8s, they actually in groups broke down and tried to summarize, what do I think this is? What does this milestone mean? What am I having to do in this project? What's my driving question? Why do you think that relates? So we actually did a little bit of brainstorming about that. So that's one of the reasons when Brian says a project is a messy muddle in the middle, that's exactly exactly what we're talking about. It's not that they're learning all these things and then at the end they find out. They, from day one today, know here's where this is going, here's what you're doing, and let's start practicing that today. So you'll see that there's always a project description. There's always a driving question, which acts as sort of the big umbrella for the entire project. They're always told, why am I learning this, right up front? Why do we think this matters? What's important about it? Then you'll start seeing the emoji used to sort of remind students what's important here. So you'll see there's a check mark there next to a milestone. And we even color code to the point that you get used to it. I always think launch is red. So launch is red. And the question we were asking ourselves is, how do we analyze a text? So we had an activity today, and you'll see right up in front and center is the information for them about what curricular area that is being focused on for the assessment as well. So in milestone launch today, they looked at how do we analyze a text. And the idea here was they were looking at comprehending text. Have I applied a variety of strategies to comprehend text and express an understanding of how text use features? We don't expect students to be able to understand that language at the beginning of a project. That's something we're building towards. So we sort of introduce it, we explain what they're doing, they get a paragraph of information. And then in the side box there, it breaks down what is that actual task. Oh, they did a welcome home text analysis. How was it completed? And I noticed that did not get updated. That should just say individual. There's my typo. It was individual. And you'll notice on this one, because we're still adjusting a little bit to the quarter system, to be honest. So I didn't put dates on any of these. So none of the students even said, hey, what are the dates? But I've been updating them in Shobi. We always have backups to our backups. So even though this project outline doesn't have dates on it, they know that the due date is in Shobi. So actually this text analysis, even though we did it today and we started it in class, isn't due until Friday morning. So they have a couple of nights of homework to get ready for it. Although I noticed many of them were handing it in already. And you'll notice in those boxes, it also says how it's handed in. So in this case, it was pages to Shobi, right? It's very specific about what to do. And then it walks through all the phases. So, we have the launch, we have the milestones. What do you need to know to answer this driving question? So in this case, there's 2 different building knowledge pieces they'll be working through. Then there's also developing critique. And again, it's not clean cut. You saw that it's a messy middle of a project thing. So even today, we were starting to talk about developing critique, and they got introduced to a book that they'll be using in the developing critique phase. But because it's a book, we need to start reading it now. So even though we're still in launch, they got the novel, they're starting to read it. And then in the end, as Brian said, that's the present and reflect moment, the moment where it all comes together, where they've come to some public performance of their work with an authentic audience. And in this case, this will be an advertisement to meet a client's needs. So that was kind of our launch today. They had a milestone attached to it, but you can see within that milestone, there'll be lots of stepping stones, things that help them get to the point that they feel comfortable demonstrating a performance of that standard. Anything I missed?
Nope, I don't think so. You might be thinking as a parent, depending on what screen you're viewing, that's very small. How am I supposed to be seeing that? Don't worry. This is something that in a moment you're going to be introduced to Basecamp, and you'll see that it is in Basecamp. And in fact, PLP 8 parents have already been added to this project. So you actually have access to this exact document, just like your students do right now. So after tonight, you can go and pull it up and zoom it as big as you like. I just need to call out Theron in the chat because he had a callback to a weeks ago lesson suggesting that maybe the brain emoji was a vector image. And I just have to say, he is actually almost 100% correct. It kind of is. Fun fact, emojis are actually treated like fonts. So you can make a font as big as you want, and it will scale perfectly just like a letter would, because they're actually part of the font set. So in a way, they do get redrawn like a font does, like a vector image. So there you go. That's your fun fact. Oh, thank you, Ms. Maxwell, for the reaction. Rest of you, I'm going to just assume you were reacting like in your homes, like, saying, oh, yes, wonderful, interesting. Nobody's giving me the go faster, so I could just expound on this.
Oh, I'm giving you the go faster.
Okay, let's keep going then. Okay, so that's great. So you've heard us mention a few times about what is, or this thing called Basecamp, and it's really also the key to the answering that first question. Well, how do I know what they're supposed to be learning? So you've probably already figured out that in PLP we don't use a lot of paper. We also don't use textbooks in a conventional way. So it's difficult to sort of get a handle on, well, what are they actually looking at? What are they learning? What's happening? So Basecamp is the what and the how. So Basecamp looks like this. PLP 8 parents have been invited to Basecamp. PLP 9 to 12 parents will be invited to Basecamp very soon. And Basecamp is project management software that's used in the real world. This is actually not designed or meant for education, but it works really well for us, and we're actually very happy to be able to use it. We organize the projects that the students do as individual projects in Basecamp. So what you're looking at here is the medium is the message. This is the current grade 8 project that just launched. And you're obviously, hopefully recognizing that it's laid out in Basecamp to align with that project guide that Petra just walked through, or the project path itself, right? We have that launch phase, building knowledge, develop and critique, present and reflect. In addition to that, there's a couple other folders. So the Go Deeper, which I kind of mentioned a moment ago, but that first folder is really key, I think, for students and for parents. That is a folder that collects together that document we just looked at, this one right here. So if you're looking, hey, where do I get a one document snapshot of exactly what the students are doing? That's in that folder right there. Also in that folder, and I think, where do I have okay, no, I guess I didn't put it in, sorry. There is also a card in Basecamp, which is what we call these little web pages, for each of the milestones. So that's kind of what you're looking at in this view right here. These are those core tasks, the things that students must complete. And for each, there is a card here that lays out exactly what the expectations is and what their task is. So we know for most projects, there's maybe 5 to 6 milestones. And if you need to know what actually that milestone is, and this is especially going to be true once you learn about Shobi, because you'll like see there's going to be some feedback on milestone 1, and you might be thinking, well, what is milestone 1? What was my child supposed to actually do? You can feel free to open up milestone 1, and actually it should be linked in Shobi to make it even easier to find. And that will walk you through exactly what the task was, what were the steps they were supposed to do, what were the expectations. It's all there in Basecamp. Petra, do you want to expand on that or talk through some of the other examples I have here?
Yeah, I'll just say, someone asked, what are the clients? So just to clarify, that the way Basecamp works is normally you'd be like a designer or something working with clients, because it is for real world software. So in this case, we are the owners, the company, and we add the students as our clients. It just allows us to control what they see and what they don't see. So most of it they see. It's just, it gives us a space to have documents off view if we're not ready to share them with students yet or anything like that. That's all it means. So there, you would be the client and the student, just so you don't see our messy planning or anything like that. So yeah, just I think, Brian, you pretty much walked through it.
Yeah, I just would add
Oh,
that I think as clients, the students don't actually see that, and parents won't either. The only reason it's appearing in these screenshots is because I took them and it's visible to me. So the
I
students
didn't
probably,
realize that. I
yeah,
wondered why a student had never asked me about that before. Now I
yeah,
understand, right? Of
don't
course,
see
they
that.
wouldn't have seen it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So you can see that Basecamp, we try to keep it as organized as the project is itself. So like I said, it's like a binder, and this is something we'll go hands-on with next week, but it's like it explodes at that point, right? It goes from the point where here's the project outline where you're going to have this milestone. How do we get to that milestone? Open the files. Here's the information to get to there. So today in class, we talked about every single one of these documents. Actually, each of your students could walk you through this for the grade 8s. We talked about how to build a team. We reflected on our summer learning. We developed some need to knows, something we visit. And then we looked at and talked about the text welcome home. And we looked at it, we discussed it. We even developed a topic sentence together. We talked about what makes a great paragraph. And then they're assigned the milestone to do. So that's kind of how the learning comes. So just to show what one of those cards looks like, you know, here was the information we did. They did some summer learning on reading, drawing, and journaling. So we actually had some we have some white books, some big whiteboards, for lack of a better term, on their desks where the students actually shared their ideas and looked at what each other said and shared out and popcorned out for the room as well to talk about those things. Yeah. So
And
that's kind of how it works.
the great news about Basecamp this year is it's not just for students anymore. So we are bringing parents into Basecamp, which is new-ish. And we have actually a special project or area just for parents. So right now students are like, what? I don't see that in my Basecamp, right? So parents only are invited to what we call Parent Central. So in Parent Central, it's small and building, but we're trying to collect here a bunch of documents and information that we think would be beneficial or helpful to parents. So hopefully once you were added to Basecamp, you did a little exploring in here. A lot of tonight's information is in that How We Learn folder that you're seeing there. So later on, you can poke around in there. There's a little bit of editing that we still need to do there, but a lot of this vocabulary and material will be there. We'll post a link, for example, to this recording in there as well. I would also really invite parents to check out that Intro to Project-Based Learning folder. That's a pretty extensive section where we spent the summer trying to explain to parents the role that they can play in their students' success in a PBL context. So there's quite a bit of information there that is adapted from a bunch of different sources that I think would be very of interest to parents. And then we're going to be building out these get to know cards. So like, for example, you're being introduced to Basecamp right now. There's a card in there that gives you a once over on what Basecamp is and some links to some helpful resources. There'll be some other information in there on grading as well, and more things to come. And we'd love feedback from parents on like what they feel they need to or want to have in there.
I was just going to say, Brian, just to be clear that one thing we make clear with the students, but maybe we need to stress with parents too, because it's considered a project system, everyone on it is part of the team. So if you go in here and say change one of the colors on the file folders, you change it for everyone on the team. So I just warn you, if you comment, that goes to everyone in PLP. So just be aware, like if you're going to post something like that or want to comment on something, it goes to everyone. So the grade A's kind of had to learn that one, and just so parents are aware too. So if you want to ask something, it's perhaps better to do it through email to the PLP email address first. And if we don't get back to you, keep harassing. But it's best not to probably be changing colors or moving things around at Basecamp, because it is
I would say that if it's a question that's specific to your child, for sure, contact us directly. If it's a generic question about a content on the card or something like that, feel free to use the comment thread there, because it might be a benefit to the whole community to see that, because we'll respond there as well.
You've got a question in the chat, Brian, just about being invited to Basecamp again.
Yeah, so there was a form that was sent probably like the week before summer, where we collected the preferred email addresses, because you'll receive an email invitation to join Basecamp. So understandably, many parents missed that, or didn't read the small print and didn't realize that was happening. So there will be another push for that, and I will be adding emails, whatever the school or MyEd address is. So whatever the school has for your official address will also be sent out. I will send invitations to that. But in the next week or so, if you still don't receive that or don't have access, just reach out to me directly and I can add your email of choice.
And I would just highly recommend as well, if you have not returned the forms to the school, that's how they know your updated email and address and all that. And those forms are attached, I believe, to your school Cash Online account.
So I see a great question saying that they're in Basecamp with their son's account and can't find Parent Central, and that's because Parent Central has not been shared with the kids. So they don't have access to that. There's not really a reason they couldn't have access to it. There's nothing secret in there. But the parents have a version called Parent Central, and the students have something called Learner Central. And that's why you won't see that there. And then there's another great question saying, are we going to be having meetings with teachers to discuss progress of the kids? And if I answered that, it would be a spoiler for what we're about to show you. So again, we'll revisit that question in just a moment. Okay, so the other question we often get then is like, okay, I can go to Basecamp and find out what they're supposed to be doing. How do I know what the quality of the work my student is doing is? Is it meeting the standard? Is it good? Is it bad? So we use a tool. One of the real amazing benefits of using the iPad, there are so many, but one of the ones we like the best is actually Shobi. Which is a product that Emily's going to walk you through in just a second. But what's brilliant about it is the opportunity for parents to also have this access, to have this window to what we call the assessment conversation. So parents can see the work that their child is submitting, or not, as the case may be. They can see for themselves what it looks like and have a feel for whether they think it's quality. They can also then see the feedback that teachers provide. So we provide feedback in the form of like written annotations or text comments, sometimes a voice comment. Parents will see that. And then normally what happens, remember the critique and revision process, there will be multiple iterations of that work. So the student will revise that work. And again, that record builds in Shobi. So Emily's going to walk you through kind of an example of that. This is going to look a little overwhelming when I change it because it's a piece of work that was reviewed multiple times, but Emily's going to interpret that for you.
I'd just say, just before Emily jumps in, just remember we're talking high level here, how Shobi works, and we'll do the hands-on next week. So don't worry if this seems like very fast and rapid fire. This is just sort of an overview of what it is about and what it can look like.
Yeah, that's actually, thank you for mentioning that. Same thing with Basecamp. That's the purpose of next week's meeting, is more of a slowed down, hands-on approach. But this is just to introduce you to some of the vocabulary. Okay.
Shobi is important to know too right off the bat, because we do get a lot of questions about, what does my learner have anything to do, or, has my learner handed in this? And so even just to know kind of a basic glance of Shobi is very important. So yes, as you can see on this very detailed screen, it does look a little different on the left side. You won't see this big black column. You will just see the name of your learner there. So Emily Jansen has very kindly allowed us to show her this brief little screenshot of a piece of work that she handed in. And as you can see, this is a great example of multiple revisions of a piece of work that was handed in. So on the far right column, of course, you can see dates and times. You can see where it says at the bottom, where the teacher has responded. And then you can see as well the little paper clip also representing that the learner has handed something in. Of course, you can see the name of the milestone, so that aligns directly with the project path. It aligns directly with Basecamp. So for example, this was milestone 2. This was a journal response that Emily Jansen had revised several times. So yeah, I don't want to get too detailed. So Brian, I don't want to glance, but you can see here that the student has handed work in, and that teachers have commented on it, have annotated directly on it. And are we going to get into the proficiency? Okay. So this is what an annotations could look like as well on the actual piece that Emily handed in here. It's confusing because my name's Emily, but it's Emily Jansen. So yes, it's been highlighted. Shobi is an awesome tool for teachers. You can see at the top, we can highlight, we can write stuff, we can leave a text comment, we can leave a voice comment. So there's lots of different tools for us to use. as well, which is great for the learners.
And I just see a question from
I do
MP.
too.
Don't worry about joining late, and we're happy to have you here tonight. Says, do we as parents have access? Absolutely. So parent access looks exactly like what you're seeing on screen. You would see, and I'll just jump back, you would see the work that your student submitted. So you could tap on any of those attached files and read them, see them. And you also then see the comments that teachers have left. So in this case, the teacher has written directly on it, but it could be in the form here. You can see of a comment left in the field. It could be a voice note, and parents have the ability to see that exact same conversation.
Yes.
Is the critique done by the teacher and student? Is should be only teacher comments or both? It absolutely can be both. And you can sort of see in this case, Emily, who is the little, I don't know, is that a cat? I'm not sure what
I
that
think so. It's a
like
little cat.
You can see
Yeah.
she is leaving some comments there. So for my next journal, I'm going to do these things. That's like a form of a self-critique. And then it also helps us as teachers to sort of focus on what to look for in her next revisions. So absolutely, the students can do that. And we even use it in sort of a workaround way to do peer critique as well. Okay. So what we didn't mention, and Emily kind of prompted me for there, I'm going to just jump back for a second. As she mentioned, you won't see the black bars there. We've just obscured the other students that would be in this view, because from the teacher view, it's a little bit different. But you can see for this particular piece of work, there's actually is what Shobi calls a grade. There is these rainbows that are being indicated here in this view. That is in PLP as close as we get to sort of providing specific feedback on individual pieces of work. So we do not, as routine practice, provide graded assessment on individual work. So on a milestone, or certainly not on like a stepping stone task, would a student ever receive 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, or any graded or numerical mark like that. There's a lot of reasons for that we're happy to expand on if people are curious and want to ask questions for. In our long experience, we've found that actually it acts as a disincentive for students to really focus more on the learning and less on just the grade attainment of a task. And by sort of removing that, we found our students are doing richer, more rewarding, and interesting work for themselves. And we're happy because that leads to deeper learning and greater satisfaction of the learning outcomes. So in the end of the day, though, the ministry does require us to report a grade. Right? That is the system that we still work within. So how does all this feedback, how does all this comments that are received on different pieces of work convert to something that ends up being a grade on the report card? So in the normal linear system, in the before times, students would have received 3 report cards and a final grade on that 3rd report card. Now in the quad pandemic period, it's a little bit different. Students will receive an interim mark very soon, actually, and then a mark kind of at the end of their quad, and then another mark later on. So we're still, honestly, that's still all being determined behind the scenes, not for PLP, just for the school in general. So there will be report cards and there will be grades. How do we get there? So this is how we arrive at the assessment. This is, again, I would say that Petra and I often say that we're kind of, we sometimes say that the ministry has come to us. This is kind of where we were and where PLP has been situated for a long time, and in what is still called by some people the new curriculum, even though it's been in full implementation now for several years and a lot longer at elementary. This is how all teachers across all classrooms are meant to be assessing, and that may or may not be the case. However, that's certainly how we assess our projects. Petra, would you like to talk a little to what the proficiency scale is, and then I'll talk to how it converts to grades?
Sure. The proficiency scale, like Brian said, comes from the Ministry of Education. It is definitely used. You might even recognize it from FSAs. It's the same one that they use in the foundation skills assessment. It's the same one they use on the literacy skills assessment at grade 10. And whenever they eventually roll out the new one at grade 12, it will be used there. It's used for the numeracy one. It's the exact same one every time. And the way it works is basically, and I introduced this to the grade 8s just this week, so they're well familiar with it as well, is the idea is that they are assessed on their understanding of the concepts and competencies relevant to the expected learning. And that is based on their grade level and the competencies assigned for that course at that time. And frankly, even within the year of their growth as a learner. So they are aiming it to develop that complete understanding. Sometimes it may come up as sophisticated, but really our goal is that all learners can reach a complete understanding of the concepts and competencies relevant to the expected learning at the time. And that's really what the proficiency scale means. So it is a scale. It's not a rubric. It's not task-based. It's not a list of things. This is sort of the overarching thing. And in PLP, we represent that with the emojis of the weather above. So you may see on milestones in Shobi that assessment represented as those emojis. So I often say to the kids that we're aiming to be accomplished even by the end of a project, right? Your first pass at a competency, you might still be emerging, and that's okay. That's where we get the initial understanding. So even now on milestone 1, the students will be getting feedback on that first milestone, but I showed you that competency is tough. It's not something I expect students out of the gate to have sophisticated understanding, not even a complete understanding. That's why we build knowledge and develop and critique things and come to a point where students can say, I do have a complete or a sophisticated understanding. And that's our goal every time we work through competencies. So students really have to, I think that's one of the biggest things about that agency piece that Brian talked about at the beginning, is that understanding that this is a shift to understand what we're developing is proficiency in something, and nobody's proficient the first time they try something. Well, rarely anyway.
Okay, I'm gonna just pause for a moment there because someone has to have a question, but we're not gonna force you to ask one. But this is a key thing to understand. So it is a great opportunity to ask a question, or maybe even just make note of a question that you'd like to ask offline later. The competency, the proficiency scale like this is definitely something that will be in Parent Central if it's not already. It's something that is in every student project that we launch, so you can find it there as well. And this is the vocabulary that we use with students all the time on when they are assessing their own work or when they are working on their work, that they understand when they receive that weather what it actually means. Okay, so how though does that turn into a letter grade? So to do that, we actually for grades 8 and 9, we have a formula that helps us get there. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But it really is not, we don't allow it to be strictly down to a computerized formula. What we have is what we call conversion logic. So these logic rules help us think about a student's work and think about the portfolio of work that they're working through when it comes time for reporting, and to translate that into what looks like a letter grade on the report card. Hopefully you're aware, maybe not, that at CCOVE, students in grades 8 and 9 only receive a percentage on their report card. So that far right column, the BC letter grade, that's eventually what you will see reported. Students do not receive a percentage. So they will only receive a C+, B, or A. And here you can see the logic that is used to sort of figure out what that looks like, right? A student, as Petra mentioned, we are aiming to bring all our students to this accomplished level. That's the goal. That's where we want everybody to be. And you might just read straight across and think, well, accomplished means B, right? And it doesn't really work that way. To make we have to eventually crunch it down to a chart, and so it kind of does look like it reads that way. But much better is to sort of use those logic statements that are in that column to kind of get a feel for how a student's portfolio then translates. So at the higher end of the percentage scale, so like, you know, in those high 80s, we're looking at a student having mostly accomplished work, some extending work, right? The student who is at the high performing side of 90 and up is having mostly extending work. By the time they reach the end of the project path, they've received that feedback, they've incorporated that feedback, they have demonstrated that extending, that sophisticated demonstrations. Well, they're going to be mostly extending, some accomplished, right there in that range. So this is kind of this is the logic that we use. This is the sort of conversion table that we use to sort of arrive at these grades. Our goal, though, is for a student's like performance or the letter grade they eventually are going to be reported to never be a surprise, to never be something that they're unsure about. They, again, are going to be receiving these emojis on the work that they're doing. So as for them or for a parent, sort of the easy way to understand this is just open up Shobi and eyeball what kinds of grades they're receiving. If you're seeing mostly accomplished suns and the occasional rainbow, you know the student is performing at that high end of accomplished, right? If they're receiving mostly clouds, they're in that developing range, and there's lots of opportunities for them to consider feedback or talk to teachers or take a look at their work. And what we will be doing is that same thing, working with students to make sure they're understanding where their work is has those opportunities to show a more developed, sophisticated demonstration. The tool that we use to sort of communicate this to students and parents is called the Progress Tracker. And it is actually being revamped and rebuilt for the quarter system. So it's not actually live right now. But what it is a sort of dashboard view that shows for each student in grade 8 and 9 what their current performance of a learning competency is. And then actually that formula that we sort of talked about crunches all of those performances across the different competencies and approximates what the current standing or report card grade is. So from the outset, I said it's not a strict 1-for-1, and it doesn't really work like that. We call the Progress Tracker raw data. So it creates like a raw score, and then it's through conversations with teachers that students actually will arrive at what appears on the report card. Emily, you either want to make that point or expand on my point, or perhaps you have a challenge what I just said. Go for it.
I wanted to just add on, just because before we also move on to the progress tracker, and while that proficiency scale and the competency-based assessment is still fresh in our minds, as Brian just mentioned, you know, those conversations with the students are so important throughout the project as we're coming to the close of a project to really see where a student is at. So we do like to have what we call competency conferences, which the grade 8s, you might ask your learner tonight, they might have already met with one of us as the teachers, and we're going to continue those for the next couple days, is conferencing with students and asking them, you know, looking back on your performance or thinking about what is going on in the project right now, how do you feel you're doing? Because ultimately, too, we want learners to be able to look at their work and also be able to recognize where they feel like they are performing. And that does come with practice, and that does come with conferencing with us. We can constantly be giving them feedback. They can be giving us feedback. So those competency conferences are really crucial as well to landing at a final grade or final assessment, and then also moving on to the progress tracker where we can all see it. So Thank you, that is all.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll often actually at these conferences, or even at the conclusion of a conference, encourage the student or tell the student to open Shobi and actually like record a little voice note for themselves or notes to capture what happened in that conference, what was said, what was agreed to, what they understood from that encounter, so that again, it goes into that assessment record, and parents of course can see that as well. Okay, I'm about to move on to our last sort of topic. Petra, do you want to add anything on proficiency scale, conversion tracker? Okay.
I was just pointing out again, just one more time, that what we're talking about here is like grade 8s and 9s, more specifically. So just to reinforce what Brian's saying. And if you're struggling with Shobi or Basecamp, Brian will do another call out for those apps, and we'll be going hands-on with them next week.
Yeah, great. So you anticipated the next parent question. So where's my, oops, I gotta move my mouse. Where's my emoji parents? There they are. Okay, they're asking, is grading different for senior grades? And you probably have already anticipated, since we said that what we've just shown you so far was, oh, actually, before I go on, I wanna address Darlene's question. She says, how often is the progress tracker updated? That's a great question. Who wants to take that?
Emily, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, the progress tracker is supposed to be a representation of where the student is at the end of a project. So that the constant feedback that students are getting through Shobi should really be reflective of where they are during a project, conferences with us again, and then the progress tracker is updated at the end of a project.
Yeah, one of the reasons.
So about every, I guess, normally in normal times, it was still about every 5 weeks, and now I guess it's every 5 weeks.
Yeah, so that's why we were kind of like all looking at each other, and
I know,
because we're actually still navigating that. As Emily said, she's absolutely right. We normally would update it at the conclusion of a project when we had fully seen the performances of those competencies, but we're realizing that will need to be adapted because just time is more elastic now. So we're still thinking about exactly when that would be, but we want it to be at a time where it is timely and provides that feedback to both students and parents that it can be acted upon. So we're negotiating that, and it will be probably more timely than it used to be.
And we should just emphasize, Brian, just before you go ahead, that in addition to that, and I know you sort of said that in passing, but it is important to note that we still follow the mandated reporting periods of the school as well. So the students will still receive report cards at the regular times when the school says they will receive report cards. They will even, I think it was made clear to the parents last night at the PAC or in Rob O'Brien. In Rob McLeod, our principal's email, that they will be getting interims in a couple of weeks as well. So students will be getting updates specifically about their grades as well. But we really probably do too much communication because you'll have the Shobi information, the tracker information, and those reporting as well. Rob O'Brien is my friend's husband. So it was kind of funny that I said that. He would enjoy that.
Okay, this is starting to get very long for people who are, I'm very impressed everybody is enduring. So let's bring this to a close with our last topic here. So for parents of students in grades 8 through 12, and for those in 8 and 9 who are looking forward to what is different in the years to come, grading in PLP for senior grades is different. So everything we've said so far with the tracker is for grades 8 and 9. And I mentioned that that is a letter grade only. Starting in grade 10, students do receive a percentage in addition to the percentages convert in bands to letter grades, but really it is about the percentage. We have this year gathered together a lot of the practices that we have always done, but again, sort of use different language and labels to help better understand and make clear what students are doing. And we're using a established academic practice that's known as contract grading. Very popular, I shouldn't say popular, very emerging and becoming more popular at post-secondary, and increasingly being used in some secondary classrooms as well. And it kind of is exactly as it sounds. What we're asking our senior students to do in grades 10, 11, and 12, I'm thinking all of them have at least 1 year of PLP under their belts. Most of them have been in PLP since grade 8. So they have lived and understand and embody everything we've talked about before. They understand the proficiency scale. They understand revising and reviewing work to make it up to what the standard is that they expect for themselves, which is also the standard we expect of them. And that has now been sort of collected in what we're calling grade contracts. So what we're asking learners to do at the senior level is to think about the grade that they would like to see on their report card. We're also asking them to think about, well, what are the behaviors and performances that I'm going to need to put in as a student that are going to then equal that grade at the end. And because we know these students so well, like I said, many of them are students we have taught for 5 years. We know them very well, sometimes better than they know themselves. And we're able to actually sit down and have a pretty honest conversation about like what they are stating as where they'd like to be and how we feel that we can help them get there. We're never sitting down with a student and saying, no, absolutely not. You're not an A student, so you should be contracting for a B. That's never the conversation we want to have. Even though this looks like it's a grade between them and the school, the way we kind of talk about this is the promise students want to make to themselves. What am I wanting to do to put in to get the grade that I want? And really all we're asking students to do is to do their best work, to perform at the level and create the work that they are proud of. And we are making the commitment to them that if they do that, if they listen to the feedback provided and if they incorporate it and bring it up to that satisfactory standard, then we are happy to reward them or honor the grade that they've asked for. So that's kind of where we're going, and we're going through that process right now. It looks a little scary when you see things here with like deductions and penalties and things like that. And it is, again, not meant to be punitive in any way. But like what we have done is been transparent and had some really interesting conversations with the students about, hey, you've always looked across a classroom and known that some students in the class got a C plus, some students in the class got a B, maybe you as a student got an A. Have you ever wondered why? What was the difference? Did you really think that you are smarter than that student over there? Is it about smarts? Is it about behaviors? Is it about like working on time? Is it about listening and contributing in class to the fullest? And talked about what that actually goes into being a student at the A level, B level, C plus student. We do not let students contract for less than C plus, just as a caveat there. And we're going to see how this works out. And I think actually we're quite encouraged even already early on. Again, we've told the students and made many of them comfortable with the idea that this is really not new. This is actually just sort of collecting and putting words to what they've already done. And I think they're quite excited about that. So this is something that they've been working on now. All the grade 10, 11, and 12 students have completed and submitted a contract. So if you are a parent of a 10, 11, or 12, and you've never heard of this before, then that means they did not take my sage advice, which was to consult with their most important academic advisors, their parents, as they sort of had a sit down on how they wanted to contract. But if you
I have an interruption there, Brian.
Yes,
I
please.
checked earlier. I would say about half the grade 10s submitted their grade contract. So the grade 10s are
in
seriously.
Fairness, I will say, Petra, it's actually better than that. They just did not put a show me comment. They actually did click the link, and it is in the document.
Okay.
So,
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
My mistake. Okay.
Yeah.
I thought the grade 10s were particularly delinquent, but they just followed directions better.
Well, they are delinquent, but that's why we love them.
Don't rag on the grade 10s. If you have a grade 10, I'm exceedingly happy with them right now because they did amazing work on their podcast trailers. and the grade 11 and 12s did awesome work as well. So if you're a grade 11, 12 parent, have to have their work here. So please do always talk to your learners about
you
their
are
work.
looking for an exciting outdoor activity this weekend, may we recommend the grade 11 and 12 Deep Cove Historical Walking Tour.
It will take you about 1 to 5 hours, depending on your pace.
5 hours?
There are 21 stops, and you will need glasses to read the text. But it is extremely informative, and I'm very, very proud of the grade 11, 12s.
All right. Well, we've been bombarded with questions at the end here in the chat room. No, we have not. But we've reached the end of the official program. So that is a huge amount of information and a lot to process. So again, we do encourage you to ask any questions via email. And even maybe we'll just sort of pause for a moment or fill for a minute. You may have a question about tonight's presentation that we'd be happy to address. We do think there is a strength in learning as a community. So you might have a question, a comment, or concern that is shared by the majority of the group. And by asking it, it really helps answer that for everybody. So, oh, great. I see some questions coming out in the chat there.
One of the questions, Brian, was what if someone contracts for a B, but they actually do A-level work?
Yeah, great question. Are there any grade 10, 11s, and 12s here that want to like be brave and take the mic and explain the role of their Sherpa?
I hear the hum of fluorescent lights behind me. So
10, 11, 12.
In the biz, we call this wait time.
I think you're going to have to answer.
All right, I will answer. So it is a great question. So one thing we tell the kids is the contracts are absolutely not locked in a safe, right? This is like, you know, this isn't like, let's be serious, this is not set in stone kind of stuff. So absolutely, if a student contracts for a grade lower than the work they're doing, we're happy to renegotiate that contract, boost them up, bring them to the level that they deserve. One of the things we have for each student is kind of like an academic advisor. That's the Sherpa, someone who's sort of keeping an eye on their progress and is a bit of an interface between them, their contract, and their teachers. And that's something that they would be receiving feedback from their teachers that, wow, this person is really doing amazing work. You know, they must be contracting at 90%. And the Sherpa can say, well, actually, they've really undervalued themselves, and we would make that adjustment. So absolutely. Lots of love for the walking tour brochure, and
very excited about this response. Very excited.
We would love some people to test it and to be that authentic audience we talked about before. Offer some
there is a feedback form too. Yeah. If you do participate in the historical tour, you can do the feedback form, because of course our students are always taking feedback. We want to revise and make it so much better, but students just printed out that printed copy at 2:30 this afternoon. So it will be published. Absolutely. Right, Brian? We'll put it on the PLP page.
Absolutely. Okay.
No, I think you have to.
I don't have editing access to the website.
You do.
Actually, you do.
Oh.
Remember the beautiful work?
Oh, yes. The beautiful work. Anyways, I'm very excited about this response. It will be published. It'll be so great.
I think the best part to recognize, I was just going to say, it has an awesome digital walking tour to go with it, with an audio section. So I think that's the best part. Brian, I know one of our pre-advanced question was about rubrics.
Yes, so, thank you. That was actually meant to go into the deck. And
yeah, so I can screen share that.
Yes. Okay.
That might even be easier if you give me permission.
Yep.
So one of the things we talked about was the idea of like, how do students, you've disabled screen sharing, so you need to enable it. One of the things we talked about, maybe just backfill, Brian, while I get this ready. Just explain why I'm showing this, what it is.
Yeah, so we did receive a question saying, do the students use rubrics so that they know as they begin work on a project what is expected of them, what the standard is, or what they're expected to do? And the parent very astutely commented that they did not notice or see a rubric in the first user manual project that the students completed. And I very much liked that comment because I immediately brought it to Petra's attention and said, that's a great point. So Petra's going to actually explain herself now.
Wow, what a great setup. Yeah, it is true. There was no rubric for that particular one. That competency was about being a creative communicator. And since it was their first time going through it, it is a competency we'll revisit many times. Spoiler, all the grades will come through with some revisions. That's what Emily and I've been working through, those competency conferences with the grade 8s to get to the point where they are all at an accomplished level for that first thing, with a few at the extending level. So they didn't get a rubric on that, mainly because for the most part, especially on the humanities side and the maker side, we really like to work with the students to co-construct their rubric, to build it from their understanding of what it's going to look like. So for example, this is from the grade 10s. They as you know, they just did or I said that they just made trailers for their podcast that they'll be working and adding to throughout the whole school year. So our driving question was, how might I create a trailer for my podcast, which informs, inspires, and entertains? And then we had specific competencies: creative, communicating clearly, being creative, that it had to be informative, inspiring, and entertaining. So for, like I said, the grade 10 classes actually divided into 2 at the moment. Although as of tomorrow, there'll be 1 class again. So one of the things they did was brainstorm in their groups. And we actually, as a group A made 1 rubric with me, group B made a second rubric with me, and then we brought it together to a final combined rubric. And this will go in Shobi with their final assessment, and they'll be asking themselves, where did they achieve this? I mean, the target is to be accomplished. How did they achieve that? And we talked to them about, what are the table stakes? What are the things we expect that just happen that aren't a checklist here? So that's why you're seeing a 1-column rubric, as opposed to some of those rubrics where you might have seen in the past a proficiency scale that acts as a rubric, where they might have said, you're at a 4 because you didn't have super clear audio. What we said is a long time ago, when we first started using single column rubrics, we said those are table stakes. Everyone needs to have clear audio, or you haven't successfully accomplished this project. That's just something we expect. And if you don't have clear audio, we're going to ask you to revise it till it gets to the point that we can hear it. And the students understand that. Your learners will understand that and understand pretty clearly, okay, here's all the things we know already we're going to have to do as part of our podcast. But what are the things that we can scale and say students are more competent at or less competent at? Where do we think you are? And that's the things that we will be working to assess the grade 10s on and have those conversations about. So that's where we do differentiate those conversations with that. And that's why the grade 8s don't have one right yet. But by the time we get to the end of the medium and the message, they'll have worked with us to build one for that project as well. And really, it's a matter of like them understanding the knowledge they need to know what they need to demonstrate. And that's a piece we work together on to get to that point. I hope that answered the question enough.
That's great.
Oh yeah. I should have mentioned, that's where it does get really personal. Yeah, you probably saw on that it gets not too Matthew and not too Matthew, right? Like they use their own language, and I think that's really important. The class understood. Oh, they know exactly what that meant and what that looked like. So
and people who know Matthew also know exactly what that meant. All right, I'm going to end the recording now, and you do not have to leave at this moment. There may be people that would like to ask a question but prefer it not be recorded. So I'm going to end the recording now. And for those of you that are watching this recording, thank you for sticking through to the end and joining us tonight.